Hello, before we start the panel discussion, I'd like to introduce you to our new online community on birdflocks.com called Prefab Pioneers. And here you can connect with like-minded experts, access a network of prefab professionals, showcase your projects and products, exchange knowledge and ideas, and connect with new customers. Sign up with your email address or LinkedIn profile. It's totally free. See you there. Hello again, and this time our panel is titled Can Modular Construction Succeed? Examining Obstacles and Solutions, and this is the first panel in the series of Next Gen Building. And I have a fantastic panel again, actually one new face this time. Lauri, can you perhaps say a few words about yourself?
My name is Lauri Tuulberg. Mostly I'm a CEO of a prefab company. We're specialized for the previous 2 years in panelized structures. We've done a couple of modular projects as well, but our factory is more equipped for panelized solutions. So we have an automated factory situated in Tartu. But I'm also a member of a board of our so we're owned by a larger company called Rand & Tuulberg Group. So I'm not the Tuulberg, so that one is my father. Started by 30 years ago. And so we have our main sort of branch would be real estate development and main contracting. So I'm also a little bit on the sort of board side on this, mostly focused on marketing and vision part, where it should head. Been really interested in broadly the directions of construction innovation and sort of my maybe sort of angle has been this broader value chain perspective. So I think maybe it comes from the Rand & Tuulberg Group sort of angle where we see it's not sort of like just where the construction is a very complicated field. It's very fragmented and so on. So we see this in our group as well, and it's been very sort of rewarding and challenging at the same time to try to sort of make these parts work together. And there's still a lot to do in the coming years. So
yeah, very good. So you're doing timber construction.
Yeah, Welement, what I'm mostly day-to-day operating with is doing timber prefab, and our main markets are Sweden, Norway, Iceland, but also Estonia. So Estonia is something maybe like a market in a transition. Also prefab and timber is I think it's becoming more and more used. It's relatively niche, of course, so it's very concrete based country. I think might be similar to Finland, but Finland is more advanced in this way. But I think Estonia is sort of it's a very interesting it's in a very interesting point at the moment where it used to be a cheap labor country, but we're not anymore because of especially in the past 2 years because of the huge inflation and so on. So we're now thinking, I think, very actively how to build differently, and that at least what I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, it's good to have somebody who's actually doing business in modular construction. But my question for the other participants is like, what is your personal experience with modular construction? And before that, maybe we can have a few words about what is modular. The broadest definition of modular construction is that it involves the process of building structures in modules or sections in a factory setting, which are then transported to the site for assembly. So it's a very broad term in general, but maybe we can focus on some things. But in general, it's like industrialized construction. Maybe it's one way of thinking it. So my question about was that what is your personal experience with modular construction? Maybe Enrique, do you have your mic is muted, but do you have any personal experience in modular?
But not really. Not much. I haven't been working on the modular field. I visit some modular houses, of course, in some projects, and as well in showcases, in demos, in fairs as well. And you always have this feeling when you enter, then of okay, this is strange, and people really using it, right? Don't we have this stigma that we need to find? I think is the main challenge to take this as a more suitable solution. As well as in my region, south of Europe, we don't see much more of this. It's more typical, see, I guess, on the north of Europe and countries like the developed part of Asia, like China, or can be Japan. I think already in the US, Japan, and Singapore are the top leading countries on the market for modular housing. So unfortunately, it's not something that it can come to your desk, let's say, in a weekly basis into a project.
Yeah. I understand. Yeah. My feeling is also that in Southern Europe, it's less often seen, let's say.
well, yes.
Yeah. Cristina, you said before we started that you don't have so much experience, but certainly something.
Well, let's say I know a lot of stuff, as you know, but obviously a lot of my work is to do with strategy, right? So the only fascinating examples I've seen in modular construction is, as you know, as part of my job, I do a lot of conferences around the world. And I see probably one of the most fascinating presentations on modular construction in Australia last year. And this company builds and specializes in building pretty much the entire bathroom off-site and install it, the big towers. And it's fascinating how, they basically went into, the details and how it's actually not that difficult. Obviously, in towers, they tend to be, the flats tend to be standardized. And yes, for everything that is not perfectly symmetric, it's actually not that difficult to do the last finishes, on site. But it's fascinating because, it starts showing all of the demonstration on how, they do basically the on-site, how they build it off-site and how they move in, right? And it's in one of the fascinating parts, it says that it's where the on-site relies on how skillful the person, the team is on that, and also tends to be different on every on every floors, on every apartment. It's actually, you don't have those challenges when it's done off-site because every single, bathroom is basically prefab. It's been basically validated in terms of quality, and it's just really the various attachment to the site that has to be checked and validated. And I was explaining how much cheaper it is. I believe, if I'm not wrong, it was about 20 to 30% cheaper for most of the cases. And also in terms of quality, it tends to be higher. And removing a lot quicker for installation.
Yeah.
Having said that, I really struggle to see this. I've never really seen this. Done on a large scale.
Jaan.
Yeah, well, I've had quite direct contact with industrialized construction. I used to work for a Swiss startup that was doing timber element houses and also bathroom modules as really modular, volumetric modular parts of the buildings. And I was head of process and IT there. It was a startup, so I could see how the whole company was built up. We had a great vision. You probably know a better company called Clavero in US. which was very similar in its business model as the Swiss startup. And yeah, so that's why I've seen the ins and out. We had a factory in Estonia. We managed to lure a lot of good people from Estonian prefab companies. Lauri is probably giving me the side eye on that. But with lots of promises and a great vision, to be honest. But unfortunately, this company didn't succeed as many others prefabs, and this is the topic, perfect topic to discuss on this podcast as well. Why does it seem that these companies that have everything going for them, and it makes perfect sense, we should industrialize construction. In Katerra's case, it was kind of, they took the example of the electronics industry, tried to automate the supply chain, integrate it. In the Swiss company, actually it's Swiss property, I'm pretty sure I can name the company, it's not a secret. In their case, we had the automotive industry. So we had a CEO from deep inside the automotive industry with software and process integration background. So they saw this whole thing in construction as being very chaotic and unorganized, and tried to take the manufacturing approach from the automotive industry. And it seemed like everything was kind of going great, but in the end, I think that it lasted about 4 or 5 years, and then it again failed.
Yeah. One of the issues that we can discuss right now is why these companies they always fail? Why do they? Yeah, because even companies that have been established before any modular process, whenever they start something, I've interviewed one US company called Skinder when they were just starting to produce volumetric modular components, and somehow they also failed, even though they had decades of experience. Why is this? Any ideas?
I would really like to hear Lauri's point of view, because he's running a prefab.
Yeah, he hasn't failed yet.
And hasn't failed yet.
Yes, tell us your challenges. And Jaan, do you know why all the others failed?
I didn't, Jaan, give you a side eye on this because because I forgot about Swiss property actually, and it is a crazy case because I remember it because we started our company when Swiss property basically was also starting, because we invested into one lines and you invested into one lines, but it was a very, the money you put into marketing and stuff like that, we were sort of like, I was envying you to have that kind of cash for marketing but anyways, I think from my side, I would just say that although I mentioned that every day we focus on panelized systems because of our factory setup, but a couple of years ago, I think it was maybe 3 years ago, we already had in our strategy that we will go also into the modular direction, so volumetric units, because we are basically literally, our neighbor is one of the biggest manufacturers of volumetric units, Kodumaja, which has been doing this, I think 30 plus now. So they invested into automation a couple of years ago, but huge factory. And we're friends, so we're good neighbors. And we tested out a volumetric unit project. Although our factory setup is automated, made for panelized systems, so we ended up sort of trying to figure out, like, it wasn't a big project, but we just tested it out and we already designed the next phase of our factory to go into the volumetric side and so on. And then we did the project, and it wasn't on the plus side. That's one thing, but we completely saw that to go volumetric, we need a completely different approach on the management side and on the sort of ICT side. So we understood what type of people we needed. Because our office is relatively light for a panelized system, but if you go into full volumetric, then you need to equip your team completely, because you're doing key readiness stuff. So So the variables are completely on a different level with, as opposed to a panelized system. The more you increase the degree of prefabrication in a factory, which means a building is a multi-component product. So the more you have pieces that are sort of prone for changes with the clients and so on and so forth. So you need to have really good systems in place, teams in place, how you sort of handle the information flow because you need to have that information completely in the beginning of the project, because like on a usual construction site, you can have that information piece by piece, nothing really dramatic happens. But in a volumetric project, especially for clients that are not used to having such amount of information fixed in a really early stage, in the basically, you have nothing on the site, and then you need to sort of. So my point is that we had that direction strategically. Basically, we would have had the funding as well to go into it, but then we just said that no, we're not doing it. So we're focused on panelized systems, and we're doing this, and then keeping the office side. We need, the projects are smaller, the turnover is not so sexy, but at the end of the day, the point of a business is to make a profit, not to make a turnover. So just we measured the risks of like with volumetric units, like for instance our neighbor as well. You need huge projects to justify the amount of energy that goes into design, the prep, the handling the information as well. And so you can't do these like 20 module projects in a big factory. There are some companies who are quite flexible with this, but I think in a general sort of strategic direction, it makes sense to be a big volumetric company and focus on volumetric, because your office is focused on this.
I think
I'm going on long.
If you listen to Lauri, then I would say it's easy to understand why his company is still successful, and why and I'm sure it will be successful, because it is down to earth, logical thinking. It's like, common sense. And in the case of Swiss property, and in case of Clatera, for example, there was a lot of, as you said, Lauri, a lot of marketing, a lot of buzz, a lot of, hype, we're going to revolutionize the construction industry. And in many ways, on paper, it looks, you can do it, but you're setting yourself up to be very vulnerable to supply chain issues, and also the project pipeline is the most critical aspect. If you don't have projects coming in, I mean, with regular construction, you have more flexibility. It's all chaos anyway, and you can adapt, and you can change and whatnot, and in the last minute. But as Lauri said, in prefab and in modular construction, you have to kind of think already at the first get-go what you're going to make, and you have to commit to those decisions, and you can't make changes.
If I can add something because I think when we take Swiss property, it's a great example, because you had a great team.
Absolutely.
And you had funding.
Best in Estonia.
The thing you did, I think, in process management, like process mapping, everything, like, because August from he was in my team, like he worked there. Roman Zaharov, you worked with process management. I mean, we worked with him as well, and I mean, like, it was basically like a dream team, and the money, and then the funding, and so I think you did everything right, but I think you didn't control the product, because architecturally those houses, and the thing also, you went into CLT houses into Swiss market, and like those product itself, I think first of all the product was the architecture. So how should I say this politely?
You can say it impolitely.
Architects had too much power, and I think the decision makers who should have controlled the whole value chain and the product, they didn't really control it. So I think at the end of the day, the product became too complicated. And I think, as far as I know from hindsight, what we have talked, that the product, it became so expensive that it was. So I think their idea was to manufacture it in Estonia, in a cheap labor country, but it ended up being much more costly. And a lot of site work
Part of
was
it is true, I would say.
Right.
From the outside, it definitely would seem more like that. But it's always a balance between the architects, the engineers, the supply chain guys, the manufacturing guys. And it was so interesting because we had the development, real estate development company in the group. We had the architects in-house, the engineers in-house, our own supply chain, our own factory, our own installation team. So it was a fully integrated, full property lifecycle company. And that's what made it so interesting. But there was, of course, architects are kind of, they're the visionary, they're the artists, and that's what people see and they want to buy. But there was a lot of arguments. There was a lot of finding this balance. So in the end, I think in any company which is doing industrialized construction, this is always going to be one of the core arguments. But that's not the biggest issue in Swiss Properties mind. I've replayed this in my mind over a lot of times, and in my view, in the end, it's still management issues that finally led to the demise, and the lack of projects that were supposed to be coming in didn't materialize.
Yeah, but maybe the problem is that you Lauri, you also talked about products, because we are not making products in this industry. We are executing projects. So the mindset is totally different, isn't it?
I would agree 100%, because our company is part of Klok's supply chain. So Skanska IKEA company, I don't know, probably everybody knows them, but so they have a very controlled product. So the product mindset is completely integrated into the whole business. So I mean, it's not like I'm not saying they're not using architects. So they're using like, for instance, one of the interesting things has been like they had the product, like, think of it like they had the car frame fixed, but they now did sort of like a facelift to the product. But the main logic of the modules, which are mass customizable into different variations of houses, the basic idea remained always the same, but you just do the facelift for the. But I agree that, I mean, like Jaan's case as well, but I agree that it was management side. So I think it's not always like this one thing that because if a business idea is great and you have funding and so on and so forth. So I think that's probably also like Katerra's case, which has similarities probably with. So I think you start moving into all sorts of directions, and you have great ideas, but then you lose focus, and then basically management sort of, and you basically run out of money.
I have a question. Is it about management, or is about the underestimation on the unique construction life cycle? Because what I'm hearing here is one of the reasons the failures is like the pipeline of the projects and everything. And as you can see, you are part of a vertical, integration, right? And I was just so now thinking another great example that just came to my mind, which is Maestec, in the UK, where they do have site, manufacturing facilities. So you can immediately say it's a spin-off. You have control over, the projects and the manufacturing facility. And maybe that is the challenge, the fact that we cannot just you cannot just create the company and produce the products unless you have a direct vertical integration with the project, the company, building things. So, perhaps in other industry, there is not the problem, but one of the biggest challenges in, doing anything, and, as you all know, I do, digital transformation, which has the same challenges, is that our selling anything to construction is selling to projects, which sometimes you have to be exactly in the right moment, the right life cycle, to make when those decisions are made. And it's exactly what you would, were saying, Lauri. It's, the anticipation and doing all of that planning. You can really do it if you're doing that at the right time. It's not just a sales pitch that you're doing, oh, okay, let's, it's something that really needs a lot of, thinking in advance. And then it has got the buy-in for the long term to make it successful. So, perhaps it's not management, it's life cycle challenge.
Also, like, just one thing to add, because I think we talked a little bit about like sales pipelines. So maybe, like the not enough projects are coming in, for instance, for a factory. But I think that's only, like, if we think of the construction value chain and the problems there, is like, it's not necessarily the only problem, because you might have a lot of projects, but they're halted because of permits, because of financing or whatever. So you might have projects that are, we see this at the moment, for instance, because it's a tough market at the moment. So you have projects, the pipeline is full, but the projects are not moving into a production phase. And it's not really, it can be funding, but it's always, sometimes it's permits. It's, because construction is there are so many people in the early stages of value chain that you need to get approvals from. But for a project, for modular construction or any kind of industrial construction setup, you need to have work all the time to keep the factory going, because the, fixed costs are just, they're there.
That's the difference between construction and, for example, manufacturing a car or a phone, a smartphone. So it's a totally
because our
different
life cycle, it's unique, it's sequential. How many
but
life cycles we have so fragmented. But how are we going to solve this? This is also things. It's like, how are we going to bring down these barriers, or are we actually giving up and accepting that it's going to be challenging and that's it?
That's a good question. I by the way, I did a couple of weeks ago, I wrote about Meyer Turku, which is they made the biggest cruise ship in the world, Icon of the Seas, and there's a certain company who's manufactured the cabins for this ship. So it's 4,000 cabins for one ship, and they made one cabin per 15 minutes. Every 15 minutes, one cabin came out of the factory. So I don't know. Many times we think that shipbuilding it's still a project-based business, but how do they do it? How do they manage to do it?
It's interesting because looking at Swiss property case, the Clavero case, and others in UK, there's also been some failures, and it's always like you're thinking, well, the electronics components, the smartphone, how complex it is, and we're manufacturing it, and it's efficient, cars, everything, the supply chain has been organized, that is optimized. Again, very efficient. Why can't we copy that to the construction, which seems kind of, it's much simpler than building an iPhone, right? But in reality, if you think of the scale and you think that, essentially in traditional construction, all buildings are kind of like prototypes. So building a prototype of an iPhone is not cheap. It is immensely expensive. And to build that into a product is even more expensive. And then you scale it up and you sell, I don't know, billions of the one phone, of the one type. And in that sense, I would say construction is actually more complex if you consider the whole, life cycle of a building, the design of it, the building of it, the management of it, and how many people are involved and how many companies, and the whole supply chain and the material, ordering and stuff, all of that. I would say a lot of people underestimate the complexity of construction. And even though the iPhone itself is more complex as a miniature thing, right? And building processors at micro scale, that's like crazy. But if you're building a house, which seems simple enough, but in the end, you are managing so many more people maybe, or companies or stakeholders. and it's also fragmented and always so unique and
And-
again project based, and that's why.
And very long.
Yeah, and
Very
clients also
hundreds.
they don't want to have often a very standardized product. I mean, they want to have uniqueness, and in the Swiss property case, we were building for the high end customers. So that's why we had to have CLT, because it was seen, as a material which is high tech, which is why people were okay with timber, because if it was just timber prefab, they'd go like, well, what is this cheap stuff? I don't want this, and build a concrete house. But then you tell them, well, we have these solid thick timber slabs which are just as strong as concrete, but they're really sustainable and eco-friendly. So that was one of the main reason for Swiss property choosing CLT, although it would have been cheaper and more even technically more superior to build out of regular timber prefab construction. But it was also a marketing thing. So, but I would say that, yeah, it is still an incredibly complex industry we have, and to automate it is very hard. Lauri knows.
I have a question. In 100 of years, we are not going to build iPhones, probably. Let's be honest, it is going to be probably something else, right? But we're still going to build buildings and infrastructure. So it's like, what can we do to fix this? Because, and one of the, I always say, one of the biggest challenges is it's the same material everywhere in the world, right? And it's the same product everywhere in the world, where you move a building 1 kilometer, like a few meters down the road, it's different because the environment is different, because the ground is different, because everything is different, right? So even if we start to standardize and modularize, a lot of elements, let's be honest, there is always going to be the architectural, and there is always, this is the thing, it's like, do we really want to live in a world where everything is standardized?
Yeah, but does it have to be? I don't know. Maybe that's one of the myths of prefabrication and modular construction, that everything has to be standardized. Because I think that we now have the technology. For example, companies, robotic companies and others are making it possible to use digital fabrication. So you can basically have any form you want and still prefabricate things. So I don't know, maybe our digital technology will allow us to be more creative, even if we use standardized components or methods.
I think there's a term for it. It's mass customization, right?
Yeah. Enrique, you had something to say.
Yeah, I was listening on the last minute saying that we are here putting in front the same issues that construction world in general is facing with digitalization in general. So, of course, modular houses and prefabrication, this is a part of the digitalization era for the construction. But as you can see, there is not much difference with the main challenges that the industry has. No? So, again, a new, let's say, idea or way of making things arrive, and it hits the same wall. It doesn't matter if we talk about modular houses or new type of the lean projects, or we talk about BIM, or we talk about anything, it hits the same wall. The main challenges of the industries from decentralized, the cost are not hard to predict. There is not enough also sufficient demand from the market. No, we can list them here. And the only thing I see different on the modular field housing is the singularity of the projects, because when we are, it's funny when I was reading a bit about this topic, because I'm not very an expert, I consider myself, that you see that it's still levels of customization, but when you are applying for a modular house, don't you assume that you are not going to have a singularity in your project? Don't you assume that your house is not going to be unique or customized? So if we add this factor to the modular housings, is it really worth it or not? Because otherwise, just build a custom one. No? We are something in between.
Yeah, I think one of the outcomes of modular construction has been that they have typically been more expensive than building on site. I don't know why that is.
They shouldn't.
Because with volumetric units, the point is that you need to have a fixed space, so a volume that you will sort of finish completely in a factory setting, which means that you, for the internal walls or the ceiling and so on, so you are doubling, so you're multiplying basically some structures, but you have 2 walls and 2 ceilings and so on and so forth. So I think, what you're making up for, like, let's say the hypothesis would be that the use of time in a construction site is the main hindrance for productivity and so on. So if that would be the case, then in a factory environment like we are, or for instance, Kodumaja is and so on. So, I mean, we control the work, like we control it by the minute with our IT systems, like what is done and so forth. But the point is that with a factory, you have overheads that are balancing this out. So you're controlling time, but you also have the factory and whatever costs that are related to it. It could be also one big thing could be financial costs. So because the money that you have put into the factory in the first place and so on. But with the volumetric parts is that first, okay, the other thing is transportation, but okay, even if we take that out, and let's say the factory is built in a location where you have, let's say, a reasonable amount of projects in the close by the factory, and you control the variable, but still you are doing. So what house is what? It's material and time. So there's not really, you have labor costs and you have material. So if you are doing some of the structurals, you're doing them double. So that everything has material and time. So although you are more efficient in those labors, but you are balancing it out. So I think it's more about quality, it's more about control. So and why were so many Estonian volumetric unit companies supplying these projects for Norway and so on? Because the cost of time there is so high on a site, so it makes sense to transport these from Estonia and so on. But if the labor costs are rising all the time, so that actually balances out something. So especially the main problem would be transportation.
I think.
Sorry, yeah.
Lauri, last time I was visiting your factory with some colleagues, I think you put it really well when you're talking about industrialized construction and you're having a factory. You think like, oh, well, this is going to be so efficient. Where houses are going to be flying out at double speed. But that's really not why a factory-based construction is better. You emphasized that it was actually the quality and the safety. That these two things are the main kind of value proposition when you want to do industrialized construction, because there's of course benefits in speed and stuff, but sometimes it cannot be that different to regular construction.
But is it also so that you can use less skilled workforce in a factory than on a construction site? So
yes, and that's what the example that I heard, exactly. And now I'm like, it was exactly what they were saying. Yeah.
I think it's not that case because I would say that you can use less skilled workers on site. You don't need a specialist carpenter on site to cut because let's say you need a really high quality house. So that's what you need. So the product is really high quality, near zero emissions building, what we need to produce in Estonia. So you need to have specialists on site and they need to move around on sites and so on and so forth. And they have problems and they need coffee and they have hangovers and so on and so forth. But let's take that kind of skill and put it in a factory environment. But now, true, you're controlling them more efficiently and so forth. But now you want to automate. So if you want to, like we have done, for instance, so let's say you want to buy fancy machinery, that means that you can't have low skilled labor. You actually need much higher skilled labor. you can't, you know, you need maybe even workers at a certain age, because the point is that you're not productive because of these Weinmann lines or Randek lines or whatever, or KUKA robots or whatever, because these are just really nice, cool looking, expensive, moving machinery. But what makes a factory productive is all those boring pieces that you need to management, IT systems, processes, logistics of materials in the factory, to the factory, out from the factory, and so on and so forth. So all sorts of these micro things moving in one synchronized way, then your factory becomes more productive. But actually, when you raise the complexity of the machinery or the setup of your factory, you're actually so you need maybe less workers, but that doesn't mean that they are like less skilled. So it's sort of like yeah, I think it's a complete balancing act. But what I do agree is that you don't need necessarily high-skilled workers on site. So let's say you're doing them panelized or whatever. The skill, sort of the skills that you need actually to put the panel in place are like, you know, you need to know how to handle a crane. You need to you know, like how to drill screws and so on and so forth. I mean, it's relatively easy to learn this, but to really learn carpentry and those tricks, it takes time.
Yeah, it's like IKEA furniture. Anybody can assemble one, basically.
But I fully agree with Lauri in Swiss Properties case as well. We were looking definitely for more high-skilled people to work in our factory, because you also have a much smaller margin of error. You know, on a construction site, if you're building it ad hoc on site and something goes a little bit wrong, you kind of think, well, okay, well, maybe we adjust this angle or we make this wall a little bit like different, and then we kind of come back. But if you're doing it modularized or panelized, they have to fit together. Especially if it's like several stories high, and you have like a deviance of even a few centimeters on every panel, it will add up to, you know, having a very large difference at the top. So you cannot allow for that. So you need very meticulous quality control, and that's why you also opt for, I would say, more skilled workers than less skilled workers in the factory.
And also management side, because like for instance, if we take timber modular, so timber volumetric units, so planning this in our sort of climate, let's say in Helsinki or whatever, you know, at this weather, what we have at the moment, which is wet, windy, and so on and so forth. I mean, you need to be with a really like large scale volumetric unit project. You need to be really good at planning and water mitigation and so on and so forth. Because you end up basically adding all that great quality value in a factory environment, and then you move on site and you mess that up with bad planning, and the weather might ruin all of your work that you've done in a factory environment with mold and so on and so forth. I mean, so it definitely increases it just shifts the skill level from different parts to maybe, I would say.
Yeah, you mentioned sustainability maybe, but do you think that modular construction is more sustainable in general, environmentally?
I think it is. I mean, I think you have to take two things into consideration. Like one thing is the material component. So a lot of the factories here, mainly the factories here, are using timber for modular construction. So that's one thing that already is with the lower embodied footprint. But I think what you also have, especially if we're talking about embodied carbon, is the control and the data you're controlling, and also the maybe the factory resources. I mean, think of all of that movement in the supply chain when you're putting that modules together. So like if you're actually like having that you might use renewable energy in your factory, and the waste management, what you're doing in a factory environment, that's on a completely different level that you are. I mean, you can do that on site, of course. I mean, most of the Scandinavian companies, construction companies, are doing that as well. but it's just easier in a factory environment, I would say.
I think it's definitely there is less waste in both in material and in process-wise, because you can optimize in the factory a lot more than you can if you're going on site. Every site is different. You could do that, but then it would take so much effort and it would drive up the costs to really kind of go down into very meticulous details, and just to then throw it away and start from scratch and zero on another site. So, but in a factory, it makes sense to do it over and over and optimize, and then continuous improvement is, the key. And also in a factory, and in the Swiss properties case, it's the product thinking. So of course, houses are unique, and especially high-end, customers, they don't want, similar houses. Let's put it that way. But still, like up to 70-80% for sure, you can more or less standardize. And what at Swiss Property also, the idea was that all of our innovation from every project wouldn't go into projects, it would go into our building system, our product. And we would have, the digital building system 1.0, 1.2, then we'd have 2.0, and we would iteratively develop and improve, the connections, optimize the MEP systems, optimize the material usage, and how we, do the layouts and everything. So there's definitely, I would say, factory-based construction, modular or panelized, is definitely more eco-friendly or sustainable. Can be.
But as Enrique said, that it's the same thing as with digitalization and BIM. So we are in a same situation, basically, that what is there something that we can now change if we want to be doing more modular construction? If we think that it's a good idea, what should we change? Is it the clients or the users or builders or supply chains, or what is everything? What is it too much?
I was reading Aarni, and I was saying that maybe you share with us prior to this podcast with Mark and Lauri, that one of the main challenges or limitations here is that, well, again, the sector and the industry state that they are not willing to delay their benefits or to invest more to have a long-term effect or saving on the future. No? And this is a risk that also Lauri was mentioning when we were asking about his company, that I think someone needs to take in order to prove it wrong or to say that is it good. Because I believe that, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Lauri, you have more expertise, that the fact of playing in modular houses game, let's say, you need to really invest more in advance. It will cost you more at the beginning, and you will see those benefits of the future. And this is totally against the ethics of construction companies. So someone new, fresh mind, outside of the industry, which is very hard also to find someone come from outside that changes. They are also stated on the interview, it's true that change needs to come from inside, needs to take, I think, that risk and offer a big expense in the beginning, expecting to have the benefits in the future because you do believe on what you are doing. I think this is the risk I need to take to offer at the end, translate all my words into a sentence, just offer a very way cheap to build your house. No? So the customer say, I want this house because it's really cheaper. I don't know if I care, if I don't mind if it looks like a mobile home. I prefer to have a house for $200,000 less. No, something. I think I read it's around $150,000 less in average that you can find with a house. I think it was on the US, that research. But that is what really called people to say, okay, the market demand is there.
Yeah, that's the long-term thinking is not something that many customers have, unfortunately. But
it's often, I think, a problem of the way construction is procured. Often it is very cost focused and centered. They're not looking at so much on quality or even time, but I think, yeah, it's strange. I mean, if you think about the digital aspect and you think about companies who have started to use BIM, I've never heard of a company who implemented BIM technologies or changed their way of working more digital, and then said, no, this is not for us. We're going to go back to the old way, and we pen and paper and do it like we did before, or just 2D AutoCAD stuff. I've never come across this, to be honest. But with modular and panelized construction, you still see that. They might do one project or two projects using, industrialized construction techniques, offsite prefab, however you call it. But then they go back to kind of, it's kind of a little bit kind of seems cheaper. I have more flexibility during construction. I have to think too much beforehand, like plan everything, and then I can't change. These guys, Lauri is telling me, you can't change the layout halfway through the project. Come on, you're crazy. So, but I want to change. So, and I think that's the part of the reason is that the industry is so used to construction being this flexible thing that you can just start with something a little bit and you can work from there, and then you figure things out and then you continue. But that's not the most efficient way to do things.
By the way, we may have 1 or 2 minutes left, but there's one huge project or hundreds or thousands of projects coming up in Ukraine. Do you think that modular construction could be something that could be used in Ukraine, because they have to start from scratch in many ways?
I think there's a lot of talk at the moment in the timber union or woodhouse union here as well, and I mean there's a lot of efforts as well, and we did I think Harmet did the first kindergarten there. I think from a manufacturing side, it would be great to manufacture in large volumes to a country that very much needs them, and so on. But I think we need to understand the costs that, for instance, if we are going to do these large volumes here in let's say Scandinavia or Estonia, we need to understand that we're putting the cost of labor here in and transporting it to Ukraine. And Ukraine has, 40 million people? I would correct me if I'm wrong. And probably in the near to sort of medium term, it would be much wiser to set up modular factories there. And I know I'm shooting in the foot here, but I mean, the point is that you are adding value in a factory environment, and if you're doing it in a high-cost country, you're adding high-cost value in a factory environment. So you're transporting that cost into a cheap country with a lot of people. So strategically, I don't think it makes sense. At least from Polish companies, probably it's really, really close. But again, it could be that the narrative is somewhat different. The demand would be so high, and then so on and so forth. But again, I think it's important here to understand what types of buildings are reasonable to do in volumetric. So it's not for everything. Some are better to build on site actually, and some are built better with panelized. So it really, I think, we need to understand the cost of the value and the product.
Yeah.
Needed.
But by the way, I just remembered a few years ago I read the news about a Manchester hotel which was built from the rooms were built in China and shipped over to Manchester, and it obviously was cost effective.
Yeah, but I also agree with Lauri that it's much wiser to actually export the knowledge we have in terms of industrialized construction and help the Ukrainians set it up there. But definitely considering the huge amount of construction and reconstruction they have to do, I mean, industrialized way would be a big benefit and a help to them.
Yeah. All right. I think our time is about up right now. And I think we just scratched the surface, so to speak. So we will continue.
Aarni, just for in the end, I would just like to poke a little bit Lauri as well, because he is running a timber prefab company here. So and I just want to get his views on the future. And it's, you know, it's a very tough job to predict the future. But how do you see, Lauri, from your experience? I mean, what at the moment the majority of construction is done on site, so it's not that industrials. Do you see this changing, or what? In which time frame do you see in the near future? You're going to think that it's going to be the same, or do you see a shift happening? Because we see these companies, you know, modular or prefab companies, large ones, lots of hype, and then going like bust, and it's happening over and over again. But do you see that it will change in the near or long term?
I think, yeah, I agree with the hype. And I think we need to bear in mind that panelized and industrial construction is not something that was invented 10 years ago. It was like, because it was actually like the biggest advances maybe were made in the 40s, 50s, so post-war period when the building boom started and so on and so forth. So in all sorts of countries, and really smart people thought about it. I mean, we're talking about those modernists like Gropius and whatever. I mean, so I think I would say in the future we will see like more prefabrication, because I think the difference at this moment would be the digital sphere that is also developing. Like, well, it wasn't there. I mean, at the moment we're doing design in digital sphere. I mean, you have all sorts of control mechanisms to maybe enhance the productivity or add more, sort of gather more value, I think, in a general sense. So I think there's definitely directions that make sense, and it will probably, if it's timber and prefab, it will probably be, you know, rise more if we take the whole construction sphere into perspective. But I wouldn't like. I don't think there will be any miracles. Just I think like. I think we should be reasonable what we actually can achieve, and again, like, think like what types of products are reasonable to do, like products. I mean, like what type of asset classes are reasonable to do with volumetric, maybe certain sort of like, it could be kindergartens, it could be sort of temporary buildings, it could be student housing and so on and so forth. So that's great for volumetric units. But there are certain houses that, like private houses and so on, and then maybe, you know, you have like renovation, and then that's for panelized. And then there are certain buildings, like public buildings, that are really high-end architecture and so forth. Maybe that's not reasonable to prefabricate at all. You have certain components, but those are completely one-off, and it will be costly, but that's a cost of having a unique architectural space that will be very innovative and inspiring to people, and so forth. I mean, so I think, yeah, I don't want to be a party pooper, but it will be no miracles.
Yeah. So you don't see a huge change, but you might see a gradual shift toward more. Yeah,
Definitely.
Well, that's why
not a revolution, but an evolution. Yeah.
That's why I really like Lauri and his approach to running the factory, and that's why I think that factory keep running for a long time.
Yeah, we'll see. Times are tough at the moment, so
yeah, would love to visit your factory one day. Maybe I can come.
Definitely. Yeah. You're all welcome.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think this concludes our little panel discussion, and we'll continue in the future, of course. And I thank you very much for your time, and have a fantastic weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye all.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.